afternoon.
Hi everybody.
So this is our first live for a few weeks due to holidays. So we've got a really interesting topic today. But before we get going, just to briefly introduce ourselves.
I am Alistair Bryce-Clegg, one of the founders of My First 5 Years.
And I'm Jenny Johnson, the other founder of My First 5 Years. So today's live is a really interesting, well, genuinely fascinating topic. We've given it a headline of Glitter and Unicorns, Dirt and Diggers, Understanding Gendered Play. So it is a massive topic and we're going to struggle to stick to a half hour on this one, I think.
Yeah.
Although we're going to.
We are.
But we are now also doing a podcast. And I think this is one of the
it's
subjects.
coming next month, so look out for the podcast adverts, but this will be a subject that comes up in the podcast.
Yeah, definitely.
And we can revisit it again on a live, especially if you'd be interested in finding out some more about it, because as Jenny said, it's a fascinating topic, but it is one that we could probably spend a day talking about and still have some time left over.
Okay, so let's get going. I'm going to start right at the basics, which is, what is the difference between sex and gender?
So, sex basically is the genitals that you were born with that determine whether medically you are male or female, and then sex will then be linked to hormones that will be released in your body as you grow and hit puberty, unless you put something in place to block those hormones. Gender is how or what you associate yourself with. So gender, you can almost think about existing in your brain, and sex kind of exists in your body. So there's lots of different elements of gender. So there are the way that you present yourself and how you associate with particular aspects of gender. So what you wear, how you wear your hair, all that kind of thing that gives it an outward appearance of how you present. There's also the kind of aspect of who you might fall in love with, which has got nothing to do with your sex necessarily. It's got to do with that kind of attraction. And then there's the element of the sex that you were born with. So whereas the sex that you are born with, in terms of whether you're born with male genitalia or female genitalia, is usually, not always, but usually very obvious at birth. The rest is more complex. And I think what we're going to explore today is the idea that not all human beings who are born with male genitalia present as the stereotypical male, and not all females who are born sex-assigned females present as females, but yet society puts us very much in those two lanes of traffic.
Well, I think very much it's girls will be girls and boys will be boys. And I think one of the things that we want to explore, keeping it within our role of that 0 to 5 space and understanding gendered play, is just to explore a little bit why often boys and girls like, typical colours, similar preferences for toys, similar preferences for clothing, and what conditioning has happened to mean that is the case.
Yeah, and I think we've had some questions that have come in, and
loads of questions
we'll be
on this
answering
one.
those, and a lot of those are around this theme. But if you think about, if you have a child and it's a boy or a girl, then from the pre your child being born, even if you think about things like gender reveal parties on Instagram, which are getting more extreme by the year, but the fact that it's a blue cake or a pink cake, the fact it's a blue balloon or a pink balloon, or you get cards, and often for girls they're pink cards with fairies and fluffy bunnies, and often for boys they're blue cards with cars and trains, and you get t-shirts for elder siblings that say, here comes trouble, it's a big brother, or you get ones that say, I'm a princess sister. So from the moment our children are conceived, the whole of society is pushing messages both really obviously and subconsciously through advertising, through language that we use in our communities, through expectations, so that when we are actually born, we are born into our sex-assigned roles of either being a boy or a girl, and from that moment you are giving messages, or you're given messages that say you are a boy, you are a girl, this is what boys do, this is what girls do. And we know through research that before they are 2 years old, children can articulate a sense of gender. So they will be able to say, I am a boy or I am a girl. And the fact they can say that means they know there are lots of things that come alongside what it is to be a boy and what it is to be a girl.
So give us some examples of why it even matters, because I know you've done a lot of your sort of thesis around this and a lot of your studying. around gender and how, for example, the play spaces that we create for children right from the very beginning are having an impact on some of these ideas.
Yeah, and I know we'll come to why it kind of matters in a second, but also things like toy shops that you go into where you've got a boys aisle and a girls aisle. And although some of those barriers have been broken down, I think what we've also got to think is if we are parents who feel like we're fighting against the kind of gender stereotyping battle, what we also tend to do, like in all things, is surround ourselves with like-minded people. So sometimes it's easy to think we're in a kind of, genderless bubble where we really are trying to make some inroads, but actually general society, advertising, television, things you see on even things like CBeebies and CITV, those classic Ben 10 type cartoons, or your Peppa Pigs, your Ben and Hollies, they all reinforce these stereotypes. And I think why it matters is that, for generations, children have been brought up and become adults that have lived in these two lanes of either being a boy or a girl. And lots of society is changing now, especially around kind of gender and sexuality and ability to express that. But in terms of your mental health as a child, you like what you like and you don't like what you don't like through experience. And the fact that even subconsciously somebody's pushing you down a route that says, well, because you were born with this gender assigned to you, you can only really like those things or those things, then your choices become limited. And also, for all of us and the unique human beings that we are, we want a society that says, whoever you are, however you were made is okay. You don't have to conform to this just because you've got that label. So I think we'd get a much greater level of mental health for children and adults, but also a much kinder society that's far more accepting of human beings as opposed to what men should be and what women should be.
I know most nurseries now pride themselves in having an environment that's not gender stereotypes and that has lots of examples of different genders doing different things, so that it's not always, pictures of mum doing the ironing and dad being the firefighter. There's a real move to try and make sure that children are being exposed to images that are different than traditionally would have been the case. But even so, when you've sat back in these environments as part of your studies, the language doesn't seem to have moved on much at all.
Yeah, I think in terms of settings, so schools, nurseries, but also in home environments, and you might know this, not necessarily with older adults. There's lots of stereotyping that still exists in our younger community. But I do lots of my work is around listening for gender labelling amongst children in a space, but also with adults. And a lot of it is subconscious and unintentional. And fairly recently, in a space where the adult basically said, oh, come on, what's going on here? Where are my tidy up team? Come on, girls, I can always rely on you to make it tidy. And of course, a flock of little girls came and tidied up the space, whilst the boys who likely had made the mess were off doing something else with no expectation. We also know that in lots of settings where groups of mixed gender children gather together, girls on over 70% more often are given positive affirmation for sedentary behaviour. So well done, you're sitting nicely, you're sitting beautifully, you're being nice and quiet. Whereas the subconscious expectation of the adult is that's what girls will do, where the subconscious expectation of adults often is that boys will be more bumptious and loud, boys in inverted commas, so therefore they don't have that subconscious expectation and therefore different language is used. So in the supermarket, in the setting that your child might attend, even in family gatherings, if you sit back and listen, you'll hear lots of subconscious gendered leakage, which is not meant to be a negative thing. There are some statements that are made where, come on, be a big brave boy, no crying now, that kind of thing is damaging because it's basically making a statement that's affecting children's mental health. But there's lots of other subtle stuff that just leaks out of all of us because we've all been raised in a really gendered society. So it's in there even if we're battling against it.
So a term that's used so often to describe girls is how pretty they are. And I know you've got quite strong feelings about that. Why?
I just think terms like, pretty is actually quite a submissive and sedentary term to use. It's not an empowering term. So also saying somebody looks pretty is making the focus about their appearance. And if we think about the kind of male-dominated society that we all are growing up in, what we don't want is for a portion of that society, women, to become subjective and it all be about how you look. And you know that already there's lots of statistics out there about how young girls particularly are, who are affected by their appearance in terms of their weight, their aesthetic, especially these days when we've got lip pumps and boob pumps and hair extensions, and you've got very young children who are aspiring to that. And if we start giving them the affirmation of, well done, you are pretty, that begins to make children see value in looking nice for other people. Whereas if we can say, you're resilient, you're strong, you're thoughtful, you're powerful, you're strategic, you're all of those really positive things that are empowering are much better to use than the term pretty, because actually they give the person you're talking to a different aspect about why I am valued by other people, especially significant people in their life, be that like mum, dad, dad, grandma, granddad, teacher, saying something about, those core dispositions that I possess is way more positive than saying I look pretty.
And it just shows itself all over in society. So I know, for example, the statistics of keeping teenage girls involved in sport is really difficult, and there's a massive drop-off because they start to worry about getting sweaty, how they look. And you can't typically play a sport to a decent level without getting a bit of a sweat on and not necessarily looking great in your makeup.
And I think, again, these are much bigger issues that we could discuss forever, but it's about changing our views as to, because somebody said to me the other day, well, what's wrong with saying somebody looks nice or somebody looks pretty? Pretty's a compliment. You're saying, well, I say, yeah, well, it isn't, because actually there are other things that you could find to say about somebody. And you get those really heavily sloganed clothes that we often put our children in, and big retailers are really bad for that, when it's all about princess or here comes trouble or little monsters club, and again there is a little bit more of a crossover, but it's minuscule compared to the market. And if you want pink sparkly unicorn trainers and you're a girl, you will find them in most retailers. If you want them and you're a boy, then you won't. And then if you are a boy and you want them and you wear them down the street, somebody's likely to say something derogatory about the fact that you're a boy in pink sparkly unicorn trainers. And ultimately the question is, why does it matter? How does me wearing pink sparkly unicorn trainers, what difference does that make?
You quite often wear pink shoes.
I love a bit of pink. I had pink shoes on, pink fluffy shoes on yesterday.
Just yesterday.
Just for the lols.
Yeah, but they look great. Now, I'm going to dip into a few questions. We've had more questions on this subject, I think, than any other questions at all. I've just seen something come in that I'm just before I do, that's coming on the live, that says personality compliments are always nicer.
Yeah, they absolutely are. And I think, again, as an adult, as an educator, as a parent, you have to reframe your thinking, because we've had years of people saying, you look pretty, or you're big and strong, or whatever it may be. Like, again, in a setting recently, and somebody said, can I have 2 strong boys to help me carry this table? And again, they didn't mean it in any way, shape or form, and we revisited it afterwards, and they were mortified that they'd said it, but it just kind of popped out. So I think it's that idea of trying to look at children as beings rather than gendered beings, and trying to make statements that link to personality, attributes, that kind of stuff that doesn't put them back in a box of, kind of being gendered.
Okay, so one of the questions that came in earlier, would love tips for dealing with family members or just random people in the street that seem to have an opinion, who are a little set in their ways, where this sort of thing is concerned. Now, they've not really given an example of what we mean, so we're going to have to take a bit of a leap as to what they're talking about.
But you hear it all the time, and the short answer to that is there's not an easy answer, because we're talking about a societal change, and that is happening, but it's happening slowly. So you're looking for key figures in society who are not stereotypes, but are pushing the boundaries. So I'm thinking about people like Harry Styles, for example, who you might well see in attire that would be historically associated with a gendered female. So you might see them in a dress or a sparkly jumpsuit or whatever it may be. or nail varnish even on men, or this is now not, we've moved forward from kind of men wear nail varnish to be something that if you were a goth or a punk you might do it, to people who do it is just part of how I wish to present myself. So in time to come, those kind of comments will lessen, we hope, because society will become way more accepting of just gender across the board. And for now, depending on what situation you're in, it's always good just to have a little challenge. But sometimes, you know, it's about, if it's around children, it's not always appropriate to do that challenge in front of the child, but always good just to go back and have that little conversation about why it matters and why is it different, and explore why people feel like that.
I'm trying to remember, and I'm not going to quite remember the detail, but Lewis Hamilton, who's like, you know, greatest Formula One driver that there has ever been, a very masculine sport right now because there are no female F1 drivers. But I remember he made a throwaway comment about his little nephew on Twitter, and he got absolutely lambasted for it. But all credit to him, because it was a very gendered comment. I think it was like, don't be a silly boy, or stop crying, or something like that. And he reflected on it, and he, you know, made a statement and was like, actually, yeah, it wasn't appropriate what I said. It was putting him back in a box, and it was making it difficult for my nephew to express himself properly. But then I think Lewis himself has gone on a massive journey where he is now breaking a lot of those gender stereotypes, a bit like Harry Styles in how he dresses and how he presents himself and the messages that he's putting out there. So just, people can
and
learn.
It becomes about authentic self. And if you're as old as we are, you'll remember back in the 90s when David Beckham wore a sarong and literally caused a worldwide, you know, broke the internet, because the internet even existed then, because he'd worn a sarong. And it was just a case of, you know, things like that become less radical, and that shows that progress has been made, but there's still a huge amount of progress. You know,
and this isn't a political agenda that we've got here, this is science and research. So can we just cover that a bit, because it is quite a polarising subject, certainly in the adult world, and we're not trying to extend this to an adult conversation because our space is the 0 to 5 space, and we're talking about gendered play, but nonetheless, the science and research as opposed to the politics around this.
We know that when children are born, other than their kind of anatomy of gender, or anatomy of sex, not gender, there is very little difference between them, and often it's said that boys and girls' brains are different and that boys' brains are bigger, and there's an old historical 5% myth that said men's brains are 5% bigger than women's brains, therefore men must be more intelligent. And actually there is very little, no scientific proof around that being a true fact. There's a really brilliant author called Gina Swift, and she's written a book called The Gendered Brain. So if you want a bit of a deeper read into this, which is not difficult to access what she's written, it's fascinating though. But she looks into the research around this 5% myth and did it ever exist. And actually what she found is different size humans, like different size animals, have different size brains, like you have different size arms and legs. And actually there is nothing. It's a bit of old statistical data that's been hanging around for a long time. So for our children, for our birth to 5 children, there is very little difference, if any, between boys and girls physically, other than the obvious sex assignment, but their preferences come from expectation and language. And then because we're basically human beings, what we do, like in life, like us as adults, you look for people that confirm what you believe to be true. So you find your tribe, as it were. So children will find others that are like them, that give out the same messages, that have the same kind of core thoughts. And therefore, like attracts like, which confirms the belief of the group. And so some parents will talk about the fact that pre-school, they might have had girls and boys in their family group and who played together, and they were all playing football and wearing sparkly tights and having their nails painted, and there seemed to be very little gender difference for either the boys or the girls. They get to a setting, a school, a nursery, and then suddenly it flips, and you suddenly get these children who are beginning to become very gendered. So often boys who want them to wear football kits and play with boys stuff, and girls who become far more pink obsessed and want to be, you know, all want to be sparkling unicorns. And that's because they've found like who are also bringing messages into their play that confirm the gender stereotype. So part of the role of practitioners in settings is to try and spot that, and also not eradicate it because you want to value children where they are, but bring in a counter argument, bring in opportunities for children to explore other things and normalise normality as opposed to normalising stereotype.
Yeah, because our job in this app is to present the science and the research, and parents then can use it as they see fit.
Yeah.
But clearly with the mental health issues that we have in our young men and women, and the way that Instagram portrays all these filters of how people are presenting themselves to the outside world, it's clearly become a toxic issue. And it's only if we're going to challenge that and change it that we can make a difference in our own little way.
And also what's fascinating for me is things like if you had a boy, and I might be speaking from really personal experience.
Could you have about 3?
Well, I have 3. I might also be just thinking about this particular...
Oh, you.
Yeah, me. If you have a boy who likes an undernetted skirt or some fairy wings, I mean, I'm talking like when I was very little, but I mean, I wouldn't say no now at the weekend, really. But if you've got that kind of child who then adults are a bit like, oh, like a boy in a skirt or a boy with wings, it's the idea that if you were or you are attracted to attributes that are stereotypically feminine or female, that will make you somehow like that. But yet if you tend to get girls who are tomboys, that's seen as a very positive thing because we're a very male society. So, you know, girls who are tough and strong and get in there with the lads, it seems quite positive. But boys who want to be in fairy wings with wands and, you know, unicorn trainers is often seen as a negative, when actually this is just about children, human beings, finding things that give them joy for various complex reasons and allowing them to have those experiences without saying, well, that's a bit unusual and that's a bit unusual, because why is it unusual other than this weird set of rules that we've got that are, if you are assigned male at birth, you can only do these things, and if you're assigned female at birth, you can only do those things.
It's things like the bossy girl or the tomboy. They're not positive labels, are they? And there's no reason to be labelling our children like this.
Exactly.
Just another little example that's come through from somebody watching the live, and it's another good one, something that's become very normal now. And they're only little wins, aren't they? But they're all wins, is the headband. So loads of lads now wear headbands, you know, especially for sports and things. There's loads of professional footballers that are there with long, gorgeous hair and the headband keeping the hair off the face. And again, you would have never, ever seen that years ago.
And that's, again, where public figures can really begin to just normalise personal preference. So not normalising girls things on boys or boys things on girls, it's just normalising personal preference. I choose to do that because that's what I want to do. It
is as if you've just read another message that's just come in, which is said it should be about the child's opinion, their own opinion, rather than us trying to put our opinion on the children.
Absolutely. And not forgetting that if you're an educator, or a parent whose child's coming back into the family home after being in a kind of education space, it's not just about you, it's about all the people that that child interacts with. So you will get children who come in with preconceptions and particular preferences. What's, again, interesting about how we develop as human beings is we talked about schematic play on this live stream. We've got a user guide that's on our website, you can download about that. But a schematic play is a repeated play. The children repeat and repeat and repeat until they become really accomplished with that play, and then they tend to move on. But there is theory that says that we all have what's called a gender schema, and against the idea of repetition. So a gender schema, which was first introduced by a psychologist called Sandra Bem, B-E-M-M, who talked about the fact that as a child, you have an acknowledgement of what your gender is, because everybody will tell you you're a boy or a girl. But then, like a schema is a repeated play, a gender schema is where you internally, from birth, on a daily basis, repeat all of those messages around what is a boy, what is a girl, what is a boy, what is a girl. So when we become adults, we've got this really strong idea of what we are in terms of men and women, boys and girls. And some of that is conscious, but a lot of it is unconscious. So you will create spaces, make choices, watch television programs. There's even theory around the hobbies that you've got, the things that you find interesting and fulfilling are not always linked to your ultimate person. They're linked to how the options you were given when you were brought up. So if you were brought up in a society that was all about girls should like this, you're only given the girl choices. So you make your preferences from the choices that you were given. Whereas if you were given all of the options, you'd actually find there's loads of things that you've never had an opportunity to try that you'd be really good at or that you love, but you just weren't given that chance.
I think that's a little bit like your parent, how you were parented.
Yeah.
It's that same thing, isn't it? And breaking cycles it's a really brave thing to do,
Yeah.
and it's a really difficult thing to do. So it's.
But going back to the other point, walking through Tesco's with your young boy dressed as Elsa and really not given one about what anybody thinks is really challenging for lots of parents.
Yeah.
Because it's about us moving that conversation forward where we get to a point that nobody bats an eyelid, because what does it matter?
Absolutely. Loads more questions. We're going to struggle to get them all in, so I'm just going to group some of them together. So I've tried to be more open with the toys that I provide for my child and the toys that they interact with, but my child always seems to be really drawn to the pink. And also just coming on the live was just a comment which kind of reinforces what we're saying here, which is the toy shops don't help either, because they still have blue walls and pink walls with the girl toys and the boy toys, which kind of goes a little bit of a way to explaining why.
Yeah, and as I said before, this is really complex. So you've got girl toys and boy toys, you've got girls playing with girls and boys playing with boys, and then therefore they begin to develop this gender schema that's around their preferences for play. And so you will often say, well, I'm presenting to you these options, but what they start to do is go back to that preferred option because it's normalizing for them in their play. So yeah, I think it's difficult because I wouldn't stop my child playing with a particular thing because they had a preference for that thing, but they've probably developed that preference through some kind of gendered experience in society. So what we keep doing is, in an age-appropriate way, supporting their play but offering them alternatives. And when I say challenge, I mean challenge in an age-appropriate way, about there are other options and other things. And it's a long journey and you're fighting against a whole society, but if you just keep that kind of, as a parent, as a carer, as an educator, that ethos, it's equal opportunity and equal amounts of opportunity and challenge, then you are likely over time to break down some of those barriers.
Yeah, you have 3 boys, I have 3 girls, and I definitely think even, 2 of my girls are adults now, one of them's 12, but they're very aware that they have all the options open to them, and sometimes they'll challenge me back because we all have bad habits around some of the language that we use with our children. So, I'll look at them as the future and see that change is coming in a good way, and that they themselves are demanding not to be put in a box and to be given every opportunity that the world has open to them. Right, we had some other questions come through. Somebody here saying that they're studying ECE. You might know what that is.
Early childhood education.
Oh, of course, I should have known that. And really learn a lot from what we're saying, so thank you very much. That's good.
Just while it's in my head, a useful thing to look at, I'm not advocating you do this with under 5 children, but if you look at genderbread, it's genderbreadperson.org. It's like a gingerbread person, but it's for slightly older children, but I use it a lot with parents, and also it's good for if you share it with family. And it breaks down the difference between sex and gender in a really easy to understand way. So genderbreadperson.org, definitely worth having a look at.
Okay. Believe it or not, we've run out of time, and honestly we've got so many unanswered questions, but I think what's going to help is that we've got a free guide up in the bio that you can download. So have a download of that and feel free to use our Instagram account to post questions and queries about what we're saying. It is a big subject, and it is, not a modern subject, because this is as old as time. This is not new, but it's just that it's becoming more to the fore, and more parents want to give children opportunities to express themselves in whatever way.
It's becoming more of an issue because parents are pushing against that, and that can only be a good thing. But there is, quite a long way for us to go. And even when I was saying, it's a complex subject. So I was talking about if your child is walking through Tesco's dressed as Elsa, we could also spend an hour discussing the portrayal of Elsa by Disney as a positive in terms of gender stereotyping, so there are elements and layers, but it's fascinating. But as parents and as educators, I think it ultimately comes down to one thing, is that sex is different from gender. So your assigned sex is not necessarily how you feel in terms of your gender. And the fact that if we look at uniqueness of children above all other things, then that will lead you down the right path. Acknowledge that we've all got this internal gender dialogue that's conscious and subconscious. And don't be afraid in a positive way to challenge the assumptions that you make, to challenge things that your partner says, to challenge things that your family say, because it's through that positive challenge that we all make changes to the conscious and subconscious things that we say and do.
Absolutely, and ultimately we know that this traditional way of thinking has been damaging for boys and girls and teenagers' mental health and well-being, and that there is a crisis of young adults and adults' mental health. So surely it is time to start unpicking things, thinking about things differently, trusting the science and research and what it's telling us, and trying to be the change that we want to see in the world. Absolutely. And that's all that we can do, isn't it? On that note, we'll just talk about a couple of things that are coming up. So on the 21st, which is next Tuesday, we have a guest joining us on the live from Bundley, and that's all about sustainable rentable clothing. For example, I think I've remembered this fact right, that did you know from birth to 2 years, you either go through, I think it's 5 or 7 sizes of clothing. Is it 7? Yeah. So there's
It's expensive.
It's expensive, it's not great for the environment.
True.
And there's another way. So somebody's coming to join us and talk about that. And then the Tuesday after that, we're back to talking child development, and we're talking about building babies' brains. So thank you. Yeah,
thanks for tuning in, and I've no doubt we will revisit this again, probably on more than one occasion.
Yeah, lovely. Thanks for joining, everyone. We hope we've given you food for thought. Cheers.
Thanks, bye.